Have you ever looked at your own life and felt like you were standing in a house someone else built? Every wall, every window, every piece of furniture is familiar, but you weren't the architect. You just lived there walking the hallways that were laid out for you long ago. That was me. For 32 years I lived in the house my father, Richard Sterling, built. Not literally, though. He was a titan of architecture who shaped this city's skyline. But figuratively, my life, my choices, even my grief felt like blueprints drawn up long before I could ever hold a pencil. And then, on a gray, damp Tuesday afternoon, when the smell of rain and wet concrete hung in the air, I was handed his final blueprint, his will. A document that was supposed to set me free. A document that promised $7 million and a future of my own making. But what I didn't know sitting in that stuffy lawyer's office was that there was another architect waiting in the wings with a very different set of plans. Someone who had been quietly undermining the foundations of my life for years, and who was now ready to build her own empire on the rubble. My father was a giant, not in stature but in presence. When Richard Sterling walked into a room, the air seemed to thicken. He had a stillness about him, an intense focus that made everything else feel trivial. He spoke in lines and angles, seeing the world as a series of structural problems to be solved. He could look at an empty lot and see a skyscraper kissing the clouds. His love was like that, too, solid, dependable, but not always verbal. He showed his affection through action. He built me a treehouse when I was 7, not some prefab kit, but a miniature masterpiece with hand-carved trusses and real glass windows. When I graduated from high school, he built me a desk from reclaimed walnut, a piece so solid I knew it would outlast me. That was his language. Wood and stone, steel and glass. My mother, Eleanor, was the interpreter. She was the heart of our home, the one who turned my father's silent blueprints into a warm living space. She was the laughter that echoed in the halls, the smell of baking cookies in the kitchen, the hug that soothed every scraped knee. She understood his silences, saw the love behind his focused gaze. She was the mortar that held us together. And then when I was 16, she was gone. Cancer came like a thief in the night, swift and merciless. It didn't just take my mother. It demolished the home we'd known. My father's silence was no longer focused. It was a cavernous void. The laughter vanished. The house became a structure beautiful but empty, and we were just two ghosts rattling through its corridors. 2 years later, Evelyn arrived. She was like a strange, cool breeze blowing through our stagnant home. She was an art dealer my father met at a gallery fundraiser, and she was everything my mother was not. Where my mother was warm and earthy, Evelyn was sharp and polished. She wore tailored black and silver, her platinum blonde hair always in a perfect chignon, and her voice had a practiced melodious cadence that could charm anyone. At first, I was resentful. It felt like a stranger was trying to hang her own paintings on walls that still held my mother's ghost. But Evelyn was smart. She didn't try to replace Eleanor. Instead, she carved out a new space for herself. She admired my father's work, discussing architectural theory with him for hours. She brought a different kind of laughter back into the house, not the free-spirited sound of my mom, but something more refined, like the clinking of champagne flutes. Slowly, I watched my father come back to life. The color returned to his face. He started designing with passion again, not just precision. And for that, I tried to accept her. I tried to believe she was the best thing for him. For the next 14 years, Evelyn wove herself into the fabric of our lives. She became Mrs. Sterling. She managed my father's social calendar, throwing lavish dinner parties where architects, artists, and developers mingled. I went off to college, started my own career as a graphic designer, a deliberate choice to work on a two-dimensional plane far from my father's world of concrete and steel. My relationship with my dad settled into a loving but somewhat distant mutual respect. We spoke once a week, had dinner on holidays. Evelyn was always there, a graceful, controlling presence, making sure my glass was always full, asking about my job with what seemed like genuine interest. She called me son, but it always felt like a title, a label, not an endearment. The stroke came without warning. My father was only 68, still vital. He collapsed at his drafting table one morning, pencil still clutched in his hand. By the time I got to the hospital, he was in a coma. Evelyn was there, her face a perfect mask of controlled grief. She held my hand, her fingers cool and firm. "He's a fighter, Alex," she'd whispered, her voice catching just enough to be convincing. "He designed buildings to withstand earthquakes. He can withstand this." But he couldn't. He held on for 3 days, a silent monument in a sterile white room, and then he was gone. The funeral was exactly as Evelyn would have planned it, elegant, somber, and filled with the city's most important people. She stood by the casket, a pillar of tragic grace in a black Chanel suit, accepting condolences with tear-brimmed eyes that never quite spilled over. I watched her, and a strange, cold feeling crept into my heart. It was a performance. A masterful one, but a performance nonetheless. I felt grief as a physical weight, a crushing pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I looked at Evelyn and I saw management. She wasn't just mourning a husband. She was managing an event, a transition of power. I shook the thought away, blaming it on my own pain. A week later, I found myself sitting opposite Mr. Davies, my father's lawyer for over 30 years. His office was a time capsule filled with the scent of old leather and paper, the quiet tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the corner. Evelyn sat beside me, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Mr. Davies, a kind man with weary eyes, cleared his throat and slid 2 thick vellum envelopes across his mahogany desk. Richard was very clear in his instructions, he said, his voice gentle. He handed one envelope to Evelyn. "Evelyn, the house, the art collection, and a significant portfolio of stocks and bonds are yours as outlined. He wanted to ensure you were well cared for." Evelyn gave a small, sad smile. "He was always so generous." Then Mr. Davies turned to me. He slid the second envelope forward. "Alex," he began, and then he paused, his gaze holding mine for a fraction of a second too long. There was something in his eyes, a warning, pity. "Your father was immensely proud of you. He knew you forged your own path, and he respected that more than you know." He tapped the envelope. "He has left you in trust until your 35th birthday, but accessible now the sum of $7 million. The number hung in the air, seeming to suck all the oxygen out of the room. 7 million. I stared at the envelope, my mind struggling to process the figure. It was an impossible amount of money. It was freedom. It was a new life. I glanced at Evelyn, expecting to see surprise, maybe even a flicker of resentment. Instead, her face was serene, almost placid. She reached over and placed her hand on my arm. "Oh, Alex, that's wonderful," she whispered. "It's what he would have wanted. For you to be secure." But her touch felt cold and her smile didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Davies cleared his throat again, drawing my attention back. "It's all quite straightforward," he said, but his tone was anything but. "The funds are held in a separate investment account, managed by a firm your father trusted implicitly. Everything is in order." He leaned forward slightly. "Your father loved you very much, Alex. Never doubt that. Whatever happens, remember that this was his final wish." "Whatever happens," the phrase snagged in my mind. It was a strange thing to say. It sounded less like a legal formality and more like a premonition. I picked up the envelope, the weight of it feeling both immense and unreal. $7 million. My father's final gift. His last blueprint. But as I walked out of that office into the gray afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Davies's words and Evelyn's cold, placid smile were the first signs of a storm on the horizon. A storm that was about to demolish the very foundation of the world I thought I knew. If you've ever had that gut feeling that something isn't right, that the story you're being told is missing, a few crucial pages hit that like button. And if you want to find out what plans my stepmother had for my inheritance, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications because the walls of this house are about to come crashing down. The drive from Mr. Davies's office back to my father's house, back to Evelyn's house, was a blur. The city lights smeared across the rain-slicked windshield, a watercolor of a life I suddenly felt completely detached from. $7 million. The phrase echoed in my skull, a strange and hollow mantra. It didn't feel real. It felt like a line from a movie, a plot point in someone else's story. What felt real, what was sinking into my bones with a chilling certainty, was the memory of Mr. Davies's eyes. Whatever happens, remember that this was his final wish. It was a shield. He was handing me a shield because he knew I was about to walk into a battle. When I walked through the massive oak doors of the home I grew up in, Evelyn was in the living room, the cavernous space my father had designed with soaring ceilings and a wall of glass overlooking the city. She was standing by the fireplace, a glass of deep red wine in her hand, staring into the flames. She looked every bit the grieving widow artfully framed by the tasteful, expensive world she now commanded. She turned as I entered, her expression one of gentle concern. "Alex, you look pale," she said, her voice like smooth silk. That was a lot to take in. "Why don't you have a drink with me? We can talk." I didn't want a drink. I wanted the truth. I dropped my coat on a chair and stood in the middle of the room, the thick envelope from the lawyer clutched in my hand like a talisman. "Evelyn, what did Mr. Davies mean? Whatever happens." She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine before answering. She walked over to the leather sofa and patted the cushion beside her. "Come sit down, please. This is difficult." Reluctantly, I sat the space between us, feeling like a mile-wide chasm. She didn't look at me but stared at the envelope in my hand. "Your father," she began, her voice, taking on a soft, sorrowful tone, "was a brilliant man, a genius. But he wasn't always practical, especially near the end." A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" His mind was as sharp as ever. "To the outside world, yes," she said, finally meeting my gaze. Her eyes were full of a carefully crafted pity, but he was making impulsive decisions, grandiose gestures. "He was worried about you, Alex. Worried that you weren't financially stable in your career." She gestured vaguely. "All that freelance art." The condescension in her voice was a tiny, sharp sting. "I have a successful business, Evelyn. I do just fine." "Of course you do, dear," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. But Richard saw things on a different scale. That $7 million? It was an idea. A beautiful, loving idea. But it wasn't a reality. I stared at her, my mind refusing to compute her words. "What do you mean, not a reality?" Mr. Davies said. "The funds are in an account. It's in the will." This is where the performance truly began. She sighed a deep, weary sound, as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders. The will was written over a year ago. A lot has changed since then. Richard, he leveraged everything for one last project. A legacy project. A magnificent contemporary arts center. He poured all his liquid assets into it. The market took a downturn, the investors got cold feet. It all fell apart a few months ago. "The money is gone, Alex." The room tilted. Gone. $7 million, just gone. It didn't make sense. My father was meticulous. He was the most risk-averse man I'd ever known. He planned for every contingency. The idea of him gambling everything on a single project was ludicrous. "I don't believe you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Dad would never be that reckless. And he would have told me." "He was ashamed," Evelyn said quickly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He was so proud. How could he tell you he had lost the inheritance he had promised you? It broke his heart." I think the stress of it all is what brought on the stroke." She had an answer for everything. Every doubt I raised was met with a perfectly plausible, heart-wrenching explanation that painted her as the loyal confidant and my father as a tragic, flawed hero. She was weaving a tapestry of lies, so intricate, so detailed, that I started to question my own judgment. Was it possible had my father hidden this catastrophic failure from me? So what you're saying, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, is that this is all just paper. A promise that can't be kept. I'm so sorry, Alex, she whispered, reaching out to touch my hand. I instinctively pulled away. I wanted to protect you from this. Richard made me promise to handle it to make sure you never felt the disappointment. The estate. It's a mess of debts. The house might have to be sold. I honestly don't know how I'm going to manage. She looked so fragile, so overwhelmed. For a fleeting second, I almost believed her. But then I remembered the treehouse, the desk. My father didn't build things that fell apart. He built things to last. His promises, his love, his legacy, they were all built on solid foundations. This story of ruin and reckless gambles felt flimsy. It felt like one of the cheap prefab structures he so despised. I stood up, needing to get out of that room, away from the suffocating scent of her perfume and her lies. I need some air, I mumbled, turning towards the door. Alex, wait, she called after me. We're a family. We'll get through this together. I didn't turn around. I don't think we will, I said, and walked out. I drove for hours that night with no destination, the city's grid of lights. A meaningless pattern below. Her story replayed in my head, each word. A carefully placed brick in a wall she was building between me and the truth. It was a perfect story. Too perfect. And there was one glaring flaw. My father kept meticulous records of everything. Every project, every investment, every financial decision was documented in leather-bound ledgers he kept in his home office. A room Evelyn had immediately claimed as her own, redecorating it within a day of his death. She said it was too painful to see his things. I now realized it was about securing the evidence. But my father had another office, a place he called his monastery. It was a small rented studio downtown, a Spartan space with nothing but a drafting table, a cot, and a single bookshelf. It was where he went when he needed to truly think away from the social whirl Evelyn created. He'd given me a key years ago. If you ever need to escape, he'd said with a rare smile, or if you ever need to find me. I hadn't been there in years. I had no idea if he still kept the lease. But it was a chance. It was the only loose thread I could find in Evelyn's perfect tapestry. Finding the building wasn't hard. It was an old industrial brick warehouse that had been converted into artists' lofts. I stood in the rain-soaked street, staring up at the dark window on the third floor. My hand trembled as I pulled out my keychain. There it was, a simple, old-fashioned brass key worn smooth with time. A key I had completely forgotten about. The lobby was silent, smelling of turpentine and dust. The elevator creaked its way to the third floor. I walked down the echoing hallway to a plain, unmarked door. For a moment, I hesitated, my heart pounding. What if she was right? What if I opened this door and found nothing but proof of my father's failure? What if the only thing in there was confirmation that the man I idolized had a secret life of desperation? Taking a deep breath, I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying solid click. The air inside was stale but clean. The room was exactly as I remembered it. The drafting table stood under the large window, a clean sheet of paper clipped to it. The cot was neatly made. The bookshelf stood against the far wall. It felt like a time capsule, a space untouched by Evelyn's influence, untouched by death. It felt like my father was still here. I walked over to the bookshelf. It was filled with books on engineering and architectural history, but one book stood out. It wasn't a book at all. It was a dark green leather-bound ledger, identical to the ones he used to keep at home. His initials RS were embossed in gold on the spine. My hands shook as I took it down and carried it to the drafting table. I opened it to the first page. It wasn't a record of debts or failed projects. It was a meticulously detailed account of a private investment portfolio, the same one Mr. Davies had mentioned. And the first entry, dated 2 years prior, was a deposit for $7 million. I flipped through the pages, page after page of steady growth of smart conservative investments. The last entry was dated the day before my father's stroke. The balance was not zero. It was well over $8 million. Evelyn hadn't just lied. She had constructed an entirely separate reality. The money wasn't gone. It was very much there. And then tucked into the back of the ledger I found a small sealed envelope. On the front in my father's precise architectural script was a single word, Alex. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was the real final blueprint. I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. It wasn't a long letter. It was just a few short, chilling sentences. Alex, it read, if you are reading this, it means I have failed to protect you myself. Do not trust Evelyn. She is not what she seems. She has been moving money for years. Your inheritance is safe, but she will try to take it. The real proof is not in this book. It is with the man I trusted most. His name is... And that's where the letter ended. The rest of the page was blank. I stood there in the silent, dusty loft, the single sheet of paper trembling in my hand. The world outside, with its rain and its traffic, had ceased to exist. My universe had shrunk to this small pool of light from the drafting lamp, illuminating my father's elegant, familiar script. Do not trust Evelyn. She is not what she seems. The real proof is with the man I trusted most. His name is... And then nothing. A blank space where a name should have been. My heart, which had been soaring with a sense of vindication, plummeted. It was a dead end. A final, cruel twist of the knife. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Did the stroke hit him at that exact moment? Did his hand fail him as he was about to write the most important word? Or was it something else? I held the paper up to the light, examining the edge. It wasn't torn. The page was whole. He had simply stopped writing. The finality of that blank space was more terrifying than any accusation. It was a void, a puzzle with the most crucial piece missing. My first instinct was to call Mr. Davies, but I pushed it down. My father's note had planted a seed of doubt about everyone. If Evelyn had been planning this for years, who knew how far her influence spread? Mr. Davies's warning in his office could have been genuine concern, or it could have been a calculated move to make himself seem like an ally. Until I knew more, I was on my own. I was an island, and the tide was rising. I slumped into my father's worn wooden chair, the leather creaking in protest. My eyes scanned the room, desperate for another clue, another breadcrumb. But there was nothing. Just the Spartan, functional space of a man who came here to think. And as I sat there, a thought began to form a memory of a childhood game. My dad and I used to play spy games, writing secret messages to each other with invisible ink. He once showed me how, even without ink, a pen pressed hard enough on a piece of paper leaves an impression on the sheet below. My heart started to pound again, a frantic, hopeful rhythm. The letter was on a single sheet, but it had been tucked inside the ledger. What if he'd written it while the paper was resting on another page? I carefully placed the letter back on the desk and ran my fingertips over the blank space below his last sentence. Nothing. Just the smooth, cool texture of the vellum. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. It was a stupid, childish idea, but I couldn't let it go. I looked around the room. A pencil. I needed a pencil. My father was a man of pens, expensive fountain pens with dark ink. But on the edge of the drafting table, tucked into a groove, was a single graphite pencil, its point worn to a soft, rounded nub. A sketching pencil. I picked it up. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. I took a deep breath, trying to channel my father's calm precision. I laid the letter flat on the table, took the pencil, and, holding it almost parallel to the page, I began to gently shade the blank area, my strokes light and even. At first, nothing appeared, just the soft gray smudge of graphite spreading across the paper. My heart sank. It was useless. I was just a desperate son chasing shadows. I was about to give up when I saw it. A faint line, almost imperceptible. A ghost of a letter. My breath hitched. I continued to shade my movements, more confident now, more urgent. More lines appeared, connecting, forming letters, taking shape as if being summoned from another realm. It was a name. Marcus Thorne. The name meant nothing to me. I had never heard my father mention it. It wasn't one of his colleagues, not a family friend, not a name from the headlines. It was a complete unknown. And that somehow was reassuring. Evelyn would know all my father's public associates. A man no one knew was the perfect person to trust with a secret. Just as the last letter of the name became clear, I heard a sound from the hallway. A key sliding into a lock. Adrenaline shot through me like a bolt of lightning. My blood ran cold. The building was supposed to be empty at this hour. I froze every muscle in my body, screaming. Had Evelyn followed me? Did she know about this place? I frantically looked around the small room for a place to hide, for a weapon, for anything. The lock clicked, and the door at the far end of the hallway creaked open. Heavy footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. I lunged for the ledger, grabbed the letter, and shoved them both into my messenger bag. I switched off the drafting lamp, plunging the room into near-total darkness, the city lights outside casting long, distorted shadows. I flattened myself against the wall next to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure they could hear it. The footsteps grew closer, slower now, more deliberate. They paused right outside my father's studio. This was it. I was trapped. I braced myself, my mind racing. Whoever it was knew I was in here. The light had been on just seconds ago. The silence stretched for an eternity. I held my breath until my lungs burned. I could hear the faint sound of rattling keys, a quiet cough. Then the footsteps moved on, continuing down the hall before stopping at another door and disappearing inside. A moment later, I heard the faint, muffled sound of a television. A resident. Just another tenant. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. I leaned against the wall, gasping for air, my whole body trembling. It was a stark reminder I was paranoid, and for good reason. I couldn't stay here. This place, once my father's sanctuary, was no longer safe. I had what I came for. The ledger that proved the money was real and a name. Marcus Thorne. I slipped out of the studio and crept down the hallway, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into a new, more dangerous world. The man I thought was my father, a simple, brilliant architect, was gone. In his place was a man who had secrets, a man who feared for his life and his legacy, a man who had a hidden ally named Marcus Thorne. And the woman I had known for 14 years as my stepmother, a charming and elegant socialite, was also gone. In her place was a monster, a liar, a thief, and maybe something much, much worse. Back in my car, parked in a dark alley, a block away, I laid the ledger on the passenger seat. It felt like a bomb. It contained the truth, but the truth was useless if I couldn't find the man whose name was now seared into my brain. The drive back to my own apartment was different this time. The city no longer felt detached. It felt predatory. Every pair of headlights in my rear-view mirror seemed to linger a little too long. Every shadow in a doorway seemed to hold a figure. Evelyn's story was perfect because it was designed to make me feel helpless, to make me grieve and give up. But my father's letter had changed the game. It wasn't just about disappointment and lost money anymore. This was a fight. He had spent his life building things, and Evelyn was trying to tear it all down. I wouldn't let that happen. I was my father's son. I would find Marcus Thorne, and together we would finish the work Richard Sterling had started. I would not just defend his legacy. I would become it. The familiar comfort of my own apartment did little to calm the storm raging inside me. The space, usually my sanctuary, felt exposed. I drew the blinds, double-checked the lock on the door, and for a moment I just stood in the silence listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The leather-bound ledger sat on my dining table like an unholy artifact, radiating a dangerous energy. Beside it, the piece of paper with the pencil-rubbed name Marcus Thorne. My first move was the most obvious. I opened my laptop and typed the name into a search engine. The results were a digital flood of uselessness. There were dozens of Marcus Thorns, a real estate agent in Arizona, a high school football coach in Texas, a dentist in Florida. I spent over an hour sifting through social media profiles, LinkedIn pages, and news articles. None of them fit. None of them felt like the kind of person a man like my father would entrust with his deepest secrets. This Thorn was a ghost just as my father had intended. Frustration began to set in. I was chasing a phantom. How could I possibly find one man in a country of over 300 million with nothing but a name? I pushed away from the computer and started pacing. I had to stop thinking like me, a graphic designer who lived and breathed the digital world. I had to think like my father. How would Richard Sterling, a man who still used a fountain pen and sketched on paper, find someone who was off the grid? He wouldn't use Google. He would use his network, his contacts, his records. And then it hit me. The Rolodex. For years before Evelyn had digitized his entire life into a sleek, impenetrable series of calendars and contacts apps, my father had a massive old-school Rolodex on his desk. It was a behemoth, a spinning wheel of names and numbers that represented his entire professional and personal life. When Evelyn had streamlined his office, she had deemed it an antique, an ugly piece of clutter. I remember him arguing with her about it, one of the few times I ever saw him openly defy her. He'd lost the argument, of course. Evelyn had a way of making her preferences seem like logical necessities. I had assumed she'd thrown it out. But what if she hadn't? What if my dad, in a rare act of sentimentality, had saved it? There was only one place it could be, our old family storage unit. The one we'd rented after my mother died to store her things, and that had since become a repository for all the objects deemed too old, too sentimental, or too out of style for Evelyn's minimalist aesthetic. I hadn't been there in a decade. I wasn't even sure I still had the key. I rummaged through a junk drawer filled with old keys, ticket stubs, and obsolete chargers. And there at the bottom was a small, tarnished brass key attached to a faded plastic tag that read, Sterling, Unit 237. The storage facility was in a bleak industrial part of town, a place of corrugated steel and endless, identical rows of orange doors. It smelled of dust and damp concrete. Finding Unit 237 felt like a pilgrimage into my own past. The lock was stiff, but after a moment of struggle it gave way with a groan. I rolled up the heavy door, and the single bare bulb inside flickered to life, illuminating a 10 by 20-foot cube of my former life. It was all there. Boxes of my mother's books, my childhood drawings, old furniture that still held the ghost of her perfume. It was overwhelming. For a moment, I forgot about Evelyn and the money. I was 16 again, lost in a sea of grief, surrounded by the tangible evidence of a life that had been stolen from me. I ran my hand over the arm of my mother's favorite armchair, its floral pattern faded and worn. This was what I was fighting for. Not just the money, but the memory, the legacy, the truth that Evelyn was trying to erase. I forced myself to focus. I was looking for a Rolodex. I scanned the stacks of boxes, their labels written in my father's blocky handwriting. Eleanor's china, Alex, college textbooks, old financials. And then I saw a box tucked away in the back corner labeled simply Office Pre-E. My heart hammered as I pulled the heavy box out and sliced through the packing tape. Inside, beneath a layer of bubble wrap, was the Rolodex. It was even bigger than I remembered, a testament to a life built on relationships and connections. I sat down on a dusty box, pulled it onto my lap, and began to turn the wheel, the cards flipping past with a soft, rhythmic thwack, 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 thwack. I went straight to the T section. Taylor Thompson, Thorpe, and there it was. A single typewritten card. The ink, slightly faded. Thorn Marcus. There was no address, just a phone number. And beneath the number, a handwritten note in my father's script. 2 words and an initial. Ghost. M. Ghost. That's what my father had called him. It confirmed I was on the right path. This wasn't just a contact. It was a code. Marcus Thorne was the ghost in my father's machine, the hidden operator working behind the scenes. The M was a mystery. A middle initial A code for something else, it didn't matter. I had a number. I pulled out my cell phone, my hands slick with a nervous sweat. What was I going to say? Who was this man? Was he friend or foe? For all I knew, Evelyn could have gotten to him too. But it was the only lead I had. Taking a shaky breath, I dialed the number. It rang 3 times each ring, stretching into an eternity. I was about to hang up when a voice answered. It was a low, gravelly voice, devoid of any warmth or emotion. Yes, hello, I stammered, feeling completely out of my depth. My name is Alex Sterling. I'm Richard Sterling's son. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of classical music playing in the background. I know who you are, the voice said finally. I've been expecting your call. Your father told me you might reach out one day. A wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy washed over me. You're him. You're Marcus Thorne. I am, he said. The question is, what do you want? I want the truth, I said, my voice gaining strength. I found my father's ledger. I know the money is there. I know Evelyn is lying about everything. My father left me a note. He said you had the proof. Another silence. This one felt different. More calculating. Proof is a complicated thing, Mr. Sterling, and dangerous. What your father and I were working on, it's not something you discuss over the phone. Then we need to meet, I said, pushing forward. As soon as possible. Perhaps the voice hedged. But you need to understand. You've just kicked a hornet's nest. You are being watched. Evelyn is not the sentimental amateur you think she island. She is a professional, and she doesn't leave loose ends. The words sent a chill down my spine. What do I do? You do nothing foolish, Thorne said, his voice sharp with command. You go back to your apartment. You act normal. You call your stepmother and you tell her you've had time to think and you accept the situation. You tell her you're sad, but you understand. You need to make her believe you have given up. It's the only way to buy us some time. It felt wrong. The idea of playing nice with the woman who had likely destroyed my father was repulsive. But I knew he was right. I was an amateur in a professional's game. Okay, I said, my voice tight. I'll do it. And then what? And then you will wait for my instructions, Thorne said. Tomorrow, noon. Go to the main branch of the City Public Library. The reading room on the 3rd floor. Find the section on architectural history. Sit at the 3rd table from the window and wait. Do not bring your phone. Do not talk to anyone. And do not under any circumstances let anyone follow you. The line went dead. I sat there in the dusty silence of the storage unit, the dead phone in my hand. The game had changed again. I had found the ghost. And tomorrow I was going to walk into the lion's den to meet him armed with nothing but my father's ledger and a desperate hope that this man held the key to unlocking the whole conspiracy. I was no longer just my father's son. I was now his agent, his last move in a game that had turned deadly. The next morning was a masterclass in acting. I called Evelyn. My voice, which I practiced for an hour, was a carefully calibrated mix of resignation and grief. I told her I'd had a lot of time to think. I told her I was sorry for storming out, that the shock had been too much. I told her that what mattered was my father's memory, not his money, and that I understood the difficult position she was in. I almost gagged on the words, but I forced them out. Her relief was palpable even through the phone. Oh, Alex, I'm so glad, she cooed, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I knew you'd understand. Your father raised a sensible young man. We'll get through this, you and I. Together. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, it was chilling. We made plans to have dinner in a few days to discuss the estate. It was the bait Thorne had told me to offer a way to make her feel in control. After I hung up, I had to sit down for a minute, my hands shaking with a mixture of disgust and adrenaline. I had done it. I had bought us some time. Getting to the library without being followed was an exercise in paranoia. I took the subway halfway, got off 2 stops early, and walked in the opposite direction for 10 blocks before hailing a cab. I had the driver drop me off 3 blocks from the library and walked the rest of the way, my eyes scanning every car, every pedestrian. By the time I walked up the grand marble steps of the library, I was convinced I was clean. The main reading room was a cathedral dedicated to knowledge. It was vast and silent, with a vaulted ceiling painted with murals of muses and scholars. Sunlight streamed through arched windows, illuminating floating dust motes and the hunched shoulders of readers. The air smelled of old paper and wood polish. I found the architectural history section, my father's world, and located the 3rd table from the window. I sat down, my back to the wall, the heavy ledger and my messenger bag resting on my lap, and I waited. Noon came and went, then 1, 2, 1, 5. By 1, 2, 3, 0, a cold knot of fear was tightening in my stomach. Had I been set up? Was this a test? Or had something happened to Thorne? I was about to leave when a man sat down in the chair opposite me. He was nothing like I expected. I had pictured someone imposing, a grizzled ex-cop or a slick private eye in a trench coat. This man was ordinary. He was in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair, mild blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a worn tweed jacket. He looked like a history professor, someone you would pass on the street without a second glance. He opened a book and began to read, not even looking at me. "Do not look at me," he said, his voice a low murmur that was barely audible over the turning of a page a few tables away. It was the same gravelly voice from the phone. "We're just 2 strangers enjoying the quiet." I stared down at my hands, my heart pounding. "You're Thorne, I am," he said, his eyes still on his book. "And you, Mr. Sterling, are in more trouble than you can possibly imagine. May I see the ledger?" I hesitated for a second, then slid the messenger bag onto the table and nudged it towards him. He didn't take it. "Just open it to the last page," he instructed. I did as he said. He glanced down for no more than 2 seconds, his eyes scanning the final entry. A flicker of something, recognition, confirmation, passed across his face. "Good," he murmured. "It's genuine. Now close it and put it away." I put the ledger back in my bag, my mind racing with questions. "Who are you?" I whispered. "What did my father hire you to do?" He finally closed his book and folded his hands on top of it, looking at me directly for the first time. His eyes were not mild. They were sharp, intelligent, and incredibly weary. "My name is Marcus Thorne. My father was a watchmaker. He taught me that even the most complex machine is just a series of simple, interconnected parts. If you understand how the parts work, you can understand the whole machine. And if a part is broken, you can fix it. Or if a part doesn't belong, you can remove it." He paused. "I'm not a detective, Mr. Sterling. I'm a forensic accountant, a specialist. When wealthy people have problems, complex, dirty, dangerous financial problems, they hire me to find the broken parts. I am, as your father so aptly put it, a ghost. I go in, I fix the machine, and I disappear." The pieces began to click into place. "My father hired you to investigate Evelyn." "He did," Thorne confirmed. "About 18 months ago. He started noticing things. Small things at first. Discrepancies in household accounts. Art pieces he'd bought at auction that were valued far less than what the receipts from Evelyn's gallery contacts claimed. Money being moved through shell corporations he didn't recognize. Richard was a brilliant architect, but he was a trusting man. It took him a long time to accept that the woman sleeping next to him was systematically dismantling his life's work. "What did you find?" I asked, leaning forward. "Evelyn is not her real name," Thorne said, his voice flat and factual. "Her birth name is Catherine O'Malley. She has at least 3 other known aliases. She's what we in the business call a black widow, though her poison is paper, not arsenic. She targets wealthy, widowed, or divorced men in their later years. She marries them, integrates herself into their lives, gains control of their finances, and then bleeds them dry through a network of offshore accounts and fraudulent businesses. The failed arts center she told you about. That was her masterpiece. A shell company designed to launder millions from your father's estate. She's done this at least twice before. One husband in Chicago, another in San Francisco. Both died of natural causes after their fortunes had mysteriously vanished. The air left my lungs. The room suddenly felt cold. You think she killed him? A stroke in a 68-year-old man under immense stress is plausible, Thorne said carefully. It's also plausibly deniable. What I know is this: your father had found the final proof he needed to expose her. He was planning to confront her. He called me the day before he collapsed. He was supposed to meet me the following afternoon to give me the final piece of the puzzle. He never made it. What proof? I demanded. What's the final piece? We had been building a digital case against her for months, Thorne explained. Every illegal transfer, every fake invoice, every offshore account, it's all on a heavily encrypted hard drive. But Richard was paranoid, and rightly so. He created a two-part key. I have the software encryption, but he had the physical decryption key. A unique object, something that would look innocuous to anyone else that unlocks the entire drive. Without it, the data is just digital garbage. He was bringing it to me at our meeting. My mind reeled. A physical key. What is it? Where is it? I don't know, Thorne admitted, a flicker of frustration in his eyes. That's what he was going to tell me. It could be anything. An object in his office, a piece of jewelry, a book, something personal. Something only he would understand the significance of. He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. Evelyn doesn't know about me, but she knows your father was suspicious. She knows there might be evidence somewhere. That's why she concocted the story about the estate being bankrupt. It wasn't just to steal your inheritance. It was to stop you from looking. If you believe there's nothing there, you won't dig. Now that you're digging, you've become a threat. She is not a woman who leaves threats unattended. He stood up, his book in his hand. Our meeting is over. You have the ledger. It proves motive. Now you need to find the key. Think like your father. Where would an architect hide the key to his entire legacy, and what do I do when I find it? You call the number I'm about to write down, he said, scribbling on a napkin from his pocket. It's a burner phone. Memorize it and destroy this. When you have the key, call me. We will take the drive to the authorities together. Until then, you are on your own. Be careful, Alex. You're not just fighting for your money anymore. You're fighting for your life. He placed the napkin on the table, turned and walked away, disappearing into the stacks as unassuming as when he arrived. He was a ghost once more. I was left alone at the table, the weight of the world on my shoulders. I was no longer just the son. I was the keeper of a secret, the hunter of a key, and the target of a woman who had turned deception and death into an art form. Leaving the library felt like stepping out of a dream and into a waking nightmare. Thorne's words echoed in my ears. You're not just fighting for your money anymore. You're fighting for your life. The bustling city streets, once a source of comfort and anonymity, now felt menacing. Every face in the crowd seemed to hold a hidden threat. Every passing car felt like a tale. I memorized the number on the napkin, crumpled it up, and threw it into a trash can, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I made my way back to my apartment on autopilot, my mind a whirlwind of fear and speculation. A key. A physical object that unlocked everything. Where would my father hide something so important? Thorne was right. I had to stop thinking like a terrified son and start thinking like an architect. Like Richard Sterling. My father was a man of symbols and layers. Everything he designed had a deeper meaning, a hidden logic. His buildings weren't just structures. They were narratives told in steel and glass. A key for him wouldn't just be a random object. It would be something personal, something meaningful, something connected to his work. My first thought was the desk. The magnificent walnut desk he'd built for me upon my high school graduation. It was the first truly adult thing I'd ever owned, and it was a masterpiece of craftsmanship full of hidden compartments and clever joinery he'd been so proud of. I spent the next 2 hours tearing it apart. I ran my hands over every inch of its polished surface, pressing on panels, looking for secret buttons, emptying every drawer. I found old college papers, forgotten sketches, and a handful of German coins, but no key. No hidden drive. Nothing. It was just a desk. A beautiful, empty desk. Next, I thought of the treehouse. His first great architectural gift to me. It was a long shot. It stood in the backyard of the main house, Evelyn's house. But I had to check. I drove by the old neighborhood late that night, parking a street over and slipping through the hedges like a common thief. The house was dark, Evelyn likely out for the evening. I crept into the backyard, my childhood sanctuary, now feeling like enemy territory. The great oak tree was still there, a dark giant against the night sky. The treehouse was little more than a silhouette, weathered and worn by years of neglect. I climbed the rickety rope ladder, my adult weight, making the whole structure groan. Inside it smelled of decay and damp leaves. I searched every corner with the flashlight on my phone, prying up loose floorboards, checking the hollows of the carved trusses. Nothing. Just the ghosts of childhood memories. Dejected, I returned to my apartment, the list of possibilities shrinking. What was I missing? I sat at my dining table, staring at a framed photograph on the wall. It was one of the few pictures I had of just me and my dad, taken about 10 years ago. We were standing on a construction site, both wearing hard hats, a web of steel beams rising behind us. My father was holding a rolled-up set of blueprints, and he was smiling. Not his polite social smile, but a real genuine smile of pure joy. He was in his element. And that's when I remembered his words. He'd said them to me 100 times in 100 different contexts. Every good design has a key, Alex. The one element that unlocks the entire structure. It's not always the foundation or the grand entrance. Sometimes it's a single, unexpected line that makes the whole thing work. He wasn't talking about a physical key, not a piece of metal. He was a man of paper and ink, a man of design. The key wasn't an object. The key was in the design. It was hidden in a blueprint. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Of course, it was so perfectly him. But which blueprint? He had designed hundreds of buildings over his 40-year career. The task felt impossible. But then I narrowed it down. It had to be a project that was significant to both of us. A project that held a personal meaning. I scrolled through memories, through years of site visits and dinner table conversations about his work, and then I found it. The City Central Library renovation. It had been one of his last great projects before Evelyn's influence had become all-consuming. He had been immensely proud of it, not for its scale, but for its elegance. He'd taken a dying historic building and breathed new life into it, weaving modern glass and steel through the original marble and oak. I remembered walking through the finished space with him just before it reopened to the public. He'd shown me a small hidden detail, a tiny stylized bird, a swallow carved into the capital of a single non-structural column in the main reading room. "That's for your mother," he'd whispered to me. Eleanor loved the swallows that nested under the eaves of our first apartment. The main reading room. The same room where I had just met Marcus Thorne. It couldn't be a coincidence. My father was guiding me. The key, whatever it was, had to be in the original hand-drafted blueprints for the library renovation. Now came the hard part. Those blueprints wouldn't be at his firm. The originals, his personal hand-drawn copies, would be in his home office. The office Evelyn now occupied. The office that was the nerve center of her entire operation. I couldn't just walk in and ask for them. I had to get them without her knowing. I had to break into my own home. I needed a plan. I picked up my phone and dialed her number, my heart, a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I drew on every ounce of my feigned sincerity. "Evelyn," I said, my voice soft. "It's Alex. I know we made plans for dinner, but I was wondering if you were free tonight instead. I feel like we have so much to talk about, and I don't want to let it fester." I paused, letting the bait hang in the air. My treat. That new French place you love downtown. Say 8 o'clock, I could hear the smile in her voice. I was playing right into her hands, the grieving, compliant stepson seeking comfort. Alex, that's a wonderful idea, she said. I would love that. I'll see you there at 8. The trap was set. The restaurant was a 45-minute drive from the house. If she left by 7:30, that would give me a window. Not a big one, but enough. I had my old house key, which I prayed she hadn't changed the locks on. I had a mission, and I had a terrible sinking feeling that I was walking into the most dangerous night of my life. That evening, I sat in my car, parked at the end of the long tree-lined street I grew up on. The streetlights cast a familiar golden glow, but nothing felt like home anymore. The house at the end of the drive was enemy territory. At 7:32 p.m., the garage door opened. Her silver Mercedes purred out of the driveway and turned down the street, its taillights disappearing around the corner. The house was dark. The clock was ticking. I took a deep breath, slipped on a pair of gloves, and got out of the car. It was time to find the key. It was time to unlock the truth. The silence in my father's house was a living thing. It was heavier, colder than I remembered. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a countdown. I moved quickly, my socked feet silent on the polished hardwood floors. I didn't turn on any lights, using only the dim glow from my phone to navigate the familiar darkness. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a museum of my own life, with every object a potential trigger for a memory that I didn't have time for. The office door was closed. I paused my hand on the cold brass knob, listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the house's circulatory system. I opened the door and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The room was almost unrecognizable. Evelyn had stripped it of all my father's warmth and organized chaos. The comfortable leather chairs were gone, replaced by severe minimalist chrome and black leather pieces. The walls, once covered in framed sketches and photographs, were now stark white, adorned with a single, massive, abstract painting that looked like a bloodstain on a blizzard. But the heart of the room, my father's custom-built mahogany plan chest, was still there. It was too big, too solid for even Evelyn to dispose of easily. The chest had a dozen wide, flat drawers, each one a repository for a different era of his career. I started at the top, pulling them open one by one. The whisper of the heavy drawers sliding on their runners sounded like a scream in the silence. I found blueprints for banks, for museums, for skyscrapers that defined the city's silhouette. Each one was a work of art, hand-drawn with a precision that was becoming a lost art. My fingers trembled as I unrolled them, the crisp paper crinkling in protest. I was halfway through the chest when I heard it. A car engine turning onto our street. My blood turned to ice. It was too soon. She couldn't be back yet. I froze, every muscle tensed, straining to hear. The car slowed its headlights, sweeping across the office window, throwing distorted, elongated shadows across the room. I dropped to the floor behind the massive desk, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The car drove past. It was just a neighbor. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I was holding my forehead slick with cold sweat. I was running out of time. I scrambled back to the plan chest, my movements now frantic. I pulled open a drawer near the bottom one labeled Civic Projects. And there it was. A thick, tightly rolled set of plans bound with a simple blue ribbon. The title block read City Central Library, Renovation and Restoration. My hands shook as I untied the ribbon and spread the main architectural drawing across the floor. It was the master plan for the main reading room. I found the column, the one near the back, the one he'd told me was just for my mother. In the detailed close-up section, I saw the carving of the swallow, its wings swept back in flight. And beneath it, in the section reserved for material specifications and construction notes, was a long string of text. It was mostly standard architectural jargon, column capital detail C7. Material Indiana limestone. Finish hand-carved level 4. But embedded in the middle of it, disguised as a product serial number, was a sequence that made no sense. MTHORNEACCNT 771 KATHERINE 901. It wasn't a serial number. It was a message. A digital breadcrumb. M. Thorne account. Catherine. 771 and 901. It was the key. Not a physical object, but a piece of information hidden in plain sight, a secret shared between him and me, disguised as a detail and a tribute to my mother. It was brilliant. It was so perfectly him. I took a photo of the detail with my phone, my hands shaking so badly the first 2 attempts were blurry. I got a clear shot on the 3rd try. I carefully rolled the blueprint, retied the ribbon, and slid it back into its drawer exactly as I had found it. As I stood up, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message. It was from Evelyn. "Running a bit late, darling. An old client called with a gallery emergency. Order us a bottle of the Sancerre we like. Should be there by 8:45. My relief was immediately replaced by a new, colder fear. It wasn't a reprieve. It was a test. Had she somehow been alerted? Did the house have silent alarms I didn't know about? Was she giving me more time, hoping I would get cocky and make a mistake? Or was it just a coincidence I couldn't take the chance? I had to get out. Now. I slipped out of the office, closing the door behind me. I retraced my steps through the dark, silent house, my mind racing. I had the key. I had the proof, but I was still trapped in the lion's den. As I reached the front hall, I glanced at the large, ornate mirror Evelyn had hung there. I saw my reflection, a pale, terrified man in a dark house, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of movement in the reflection, a shadow in the dining room behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just the dark, empty room. My mind was playing tricks on me. My nerves were shot. I turned back to the door, my hand on the deadbolt. And then I saw it, not in the room, but in the mirror's reflection. A tiny, blinking red light, no bigger than a pinprick in the corner of the ceiling. A security camera. She knew. She knew I was here. The text message wasn't a coincidence. It was a taunt. She wasn't late. She was watching. She was letting me find what I was looking for, letting me think I was winning. The dinner wasn't just a distraction. It was the final act of the play, and I was walking right into her trap. Panic is a cold, sharp thing. It screamed at me to run, to smash the camera, to call Thorne and tell him the plan was blown. But I couldn't. Running would be an admission of guilt. It would prove I was there to steal something. I had to play the part. I had to walk out that door as if I hadn't seen a thing. I had to go to that dinner. I forced my hand to be steady as I unlocked the door. I walked out, closed it quietly behind me, and walked calmly down the driveway. Every step felt like I was walking a tightrope over a canyon. I felt her eyes on my back, watching from some hidden monitor, a queen watching a pawn move into position. My car started without issue. I pulled away from the curb, my eyes locked on the rearview mirror, half expecting her Mercedes to appear behind me. But the street remained empty. The drive to the restaurant was the longest 45 minutes of my life. The key, the string of numbers and letters, was burned into my memory. I had deleted the photo. I had my weapon. But she had the battlefield. She knew I had it. This dinner was no longer about deception. It was about confrontation. I arrived at the restaurant first. It was an exclusive, hushed place where conversations were held in low murmurs, and the clinking of silverware was the loudest sound. I told the maitre d' we're meeting, and he led me to a secluded corner booth. I ordered the bottle of Sancerre just as she'd asked. The bottle arrived, and the waiter poured me a glass. I stared at the pale, golden liquid my reflection distorted on its surface. I looked like a stranger to myself. She arrived at 8:47. She swept into the restaurant all grace and apologies, offering her cheek for a kiss I didn't want to give. She was wearing a black dress that was both elegant and severe. Diamonds glittered at her ears and throat. She was a beautiful, predatory bird. "Alex, I am so dreadfully sorry," she said, sliding into the booth. "You can't imagine the day I've had." Thank you for waiting. It's no problem, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I'm just glad you could make it. The waiter came and took our order. The small talk was excruciating. She asked about my work. I asked about her gallery emergency. We were like two spies exchanging pleasantries, each of us fully aware of the poison under the table. She was playing with me, enjoying her power, her control. She thought she had me trapped, the foolish stepson who had stumbled into her web. Finally, after the appetizers arrived, I made my move. I was feeling a bit nostalgic today, I said, swirling the wine in my glass. I drove by the old house. Her eyes, which had been scanning the room, snapped to mine. A flicker of something interest crossed her face. Oh, why on earth would you do that? I don't know, I said with a shrug. Just thinking about Dad. About all the things he built. The library, for instance. I was thinking about that beautiful reading room. The details are just incredible. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners. Your father was a master of details. He was, I agreed. He had a key to every design. The one element that made it all work. I took a slow sip of wine, holding her gaze over the rim of my glass. He told me he put a special detail in the library just for my mother. A little carving of a swallow. The color drained from her face. It was subtle, but I saw it. The mask of polite concern cracked, and for a split second I saw the cold, hard woman beneath. How sentimental, she said, her voice a little too sharp. It is, I said. He hid things in plain sight, secrets, messages, things you could only find if you knew exactly where to look. Things like, say, a serial number. The silence between us was suddenly deafening. The ambient noise of the restaurant faded away. It was just the two of us locked in a battle of wills. She put down her fork, her movements slow and deliberate. The charm, the warmth, the performance, it all evaporated. The woman staring at me now was a stranger, her eyes as cold and dead as a shark's. What is it you think you know, Alex? She asked, her voice low and dangerous. I know the money isn't gone, I said, matching her tone. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the shell corporation disguised as an art center. I know my father hired a forensic accountant. And I know your real name. I let the last one land. I saw the flash of genuine shock in her eyes, quickly masked by fury. My name is Evelyn Sterling, she hissed. No, I said, leaning forward. Your name is Catherine O'Malley. And you've done this before. Chicago. San Francisco. How many husbands is it, Catherine? How many men have you buried after you bled their families dry? She didn't deny it. She just stared at me, her face a blank canvas of rage. You stupid, sentimental boy, she whispered. You have no idea what you're meddling in. Your father was a fool. A trusting, arrogant fool who thought he could outsmart me. And now you're making the same mistake. I don't think so, I said. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. I have the key, Evelyn. The string of code from the blueprint. The one that unlocks the entire encrypted drive Marcus Thorne has been building for the last 18 months. Every transfer, every illegal transaction. Everything. She laughed a short, ugly, humorless sound. And what do you plan to do? Walk into a police station with a wild story? They'll laugh you out of the building. It'll be my word, the grieving widow, against yours. Who do you think they'll believe? You're right, I said. They might not believe me. I leaned back in the booth, a bluff forming on my lips, born of pure desperation. That's why I've already sent the key to Thorne. And he has a dead man's switch. If anything happens to me, if I get into a car accident, if I have a sudden stroke, like my father, if I simply disappear, the entire contents of that drive, along with a detailed narrative of your activities, get sent to the FBI, the IRS, and the city's top investigative journalist. Checkmate. I watched her process this. I had no idea if Thorne had such a thing, but it was the kind of move a man like him would make. It was the kind of move my father would have appreciated. She stood up abruptly, throwing her napkin on the table. The performance was over. "This isn't finished," she said, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury. "Oh, I think it is," I said, looking up at her. She turned and walked away, not with the graceful glide she'd entered with, but with a stiff, furious stride. She didn't look back. I watched her go, and only then did I allow myself to breathe. My bluff had worked. I had won. But as I sat there alone in the fancy restaurant, a half-eaten appetizer on my plate, I knew she was right. It wasn't finished. I hadn't won. I had just declared war. And Catherine O'Malley was not the kind of woman to accept defeat. The walk back to my car was a gauntlet of paranoia. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I expected her to be waiting for me in the parking garage, to have sent someone to follow me. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of the city at night. As soon as I was in my car with the doors locked, I called the burner number Thorne had given me. He answered on the first ring. "Talk to me." "I have it," I said, my voice shaking. "The key. It's a code hidden in the library blueprints. M. Thorne, account 771, Catherine 901. There was a moment of silence, and I could hear the faint sound of typing. "That's it," Thorne said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "The final decryption string. We have everything. Where are you? I just left the restaurant." I confronted her. I told her everything. "I bluffed that you had a dead man's switch." "That wasn't a bluff," Thorne said calmly. "It's standard protocol in cases like this. It's already in place. But you forced her hand, Alex. She's cornered. And a cornered animal is the most dangerous. Don't go to your apartment. It's not safe. There's a hotel, the Penfield, on 5th and Grand. Go there. Check in under the name Marcus Thorne. Room 771. I'll meet you there in 1 hour. We'll go to the authorities in the morning. Room 771. The number from the key. It was a pre-arranged safe house. My father and Thorne had planned for this. My dad knew he was in danger. He had been setting up his own endgame. The drive to the hotel was tense, but I made it without incident. The Penfield was an old, discreet hotel, the kind that valued its clients' privacy. Checking in under Thorne's name felt strange, but the clerk didn't bat an eye. Room 771 was a simple, clean suite on the 7th floor with a view of the city my father had helped build. I locked and bolted the door, then stood at the window, looking out at the glittering skyline. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. We had her. The truth was going to come out. My father's name would be cleared and his legacy would be secure. A knock at the door made me jump. I wasn't expecting Thorne for another 40 minutes. "Who is it?" I called out, my hand hovering over the doorknob. "Room service." The voice was muffled. I hadn't ordered room service. A cold dread washed over me. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but then I saw it. A small black device taped to the doorframe right over the peephole's lens. My blood ran cold. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. It was a trap. She had found me. But how had she bugged my car, my phone? It didn't matter. She was here. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered, my hand trembling. "You really are a sentimental fool, aren't you, Alex?" It was Evelyn's voice, cold and clear. "Running to a safe house your father set up. Did you really think I wouldn't know about it? I've had Marcus Thorne followed for the last 6 months." My world tilted. She had been one step ahead the entire time. "It's over, Evelyn," I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "Thorne has everything. The police are on their way." "I don't think so," she said with a chilling calm. "There's a briefcase outside your door. It contains a passport, a plane ticket to Brazil, and $500,000 in cash. Enough for you to disappear and start a new life. The door at the end of the hall leads to a service elevator. You have 5 minutes to take the deal and walk away. Or I can have my associate, the one who just delivered your room service, come in and retrieve the key a different way. He is not a gentleman. The choice is yours. Give me the code, and you live." This was her endgame, Not a legal battle, but a brute force extraction. She didn't want to kill me. She wanted to silence me, to make me run so she could erase the final threat. My mind raced. I was trapped. I looked around the room, desperate. There was no escape. And then my eyes landed on the hotel phone on the nightstand. An idea, a crazy, desperate long shot sparked in my mind. "The code's not in my head, Evelyn," I lied, my voice shaking. "It's too complex." My father wrote it down. It's in a safe deposit box. The key to the box is here with me." "Don't lie to me, Alex," she snarled. "I'm not," I yelled back. "The box is at the downtown branch of City Central Bank. The key is here. You can have the key, but you have to let me walk away." I was stalling, buying myself seconds. I picked up the hotel phone and dialed Thorne's burner number. "What's your price?" Evelyn asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "Just let me go," I said. While she was distracted, I whispered into the hotel phone, room 771. "Now, Evelyn." "She's here." Thorne would understand. "Very well," Evelyn said. "Slide the key under the door. And this conversation is over." I hung up. I looked around the room, found the heavy brass "Do Not Disturb" sign, and slid its tag under the door. "That's it," I yelled. "Now leave," I heard a man's heavy footsteps approach the door. A hand picked up the tag. There was a pause. He knew it wasn't a key. The doorknob began to turn. They were coming in. I backed away, grabbing the heaviest lamp I could find, my last pathetic line of defense. The lock on the door exploded inward with a deafening bang. The door flew open, and a large, imposing man in a dark suit filled the frame. Behind him down the hall stood Evelyn, a triumphant, cruel smile on her face. The man took a step into the room, and then from the stairwell at the end of the hall, chaos erupted. "FBI, don't move." 2 agents stormed the hallway, weapons drawn. The large man spun around, reaching for a weapon in his jacket, but he was too slow. At the same time, another figure emerged from the room next to mine, Marcus Thorne. He must have been there the whole time, a ghost in the adjoining room waiting. Evelyn's face was a mask of pure disbelief. Her triumphant smile crumbled into a snarl of hatred as the agents cuffed her. Her eyes found mine across the chaotic hallway. It was a look of pure, undiluted venom. Thorne walked calmly into my room, stepping over the broken door. He looked at me then, at the lamp I was still clutching. "I told you to wait for my instructions," he said, a hint of a wry smile on his lips. "She found me," I said, my voice hoarse. "I know," Thorne said. "We've been tracking her trackers for weeks. I knew she'd make a move tonight. I just needed her to make it in front of witnesses." He nodded towards the hallway. "Attempted burglary, assault, coercion, conspiracy. I think that should be enough to get started." "Well done, Mr. Sterling. Your father would be proud." As they led a screaming, struggling Evelyn away in handcuffs, her elegant facade finally shattered. I knew it was truly over. The lies, the fear, the fight. It was done. The ghost had been caught. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Evelyn, or Catherine O'Malley, as she was now officially known, was a professional, and she didn't go down without a fight. But the evidence was overwhelming. The encrypted drive unlocked with my father's key was a digital roadmap of her entire criminal enterprise. It implicated not just her, but a half-dozen shady art dealers, corrupt lawyers, and money launderers. The story became a media sensation. The architect's widow, a black widow who had preyed on the wealthy and powerful for over a decade. The families of her other husbands came forward and new investigations were opened. Her empire of lies crumbled to dust. Marcus Thorne, true to his word, remained a ghost. He provided the authorities with all the information they needed and then disappeared back into the world of numbers and shadows, but not before ensuring the full $8 million of my inheritance was transferred safely into my name. For a long time, I didn't touch the money. I couldn't. It felt tainted by the fight, by the memory of Evelyn's greed. I went back to my life, to my graphic design business, trying to find some sense of normalcy. But nothing was normal anymore. I had changed. I had walked through fire and come out the other side, not unscathed, but stronger. I was no longer the boy living in his father's shadow. I had stepped out into the light. One day, I found myself standing in front of the city central library. I walked into the main reading room and went to the back to the column with the swallow carved into its capital. I ran my hand over the cool, smooth limestone, over the hidden tribute to my mother. And in that quiet, sunlit room, I finally understood what I needed to do. This money wasn't Evelyn's, and it wasn't just my father's. It was a legacy. It was a tool. It was a chance to build something. 6 months later, I cashed the first check. Not for a new car or a fancy apartment, but to establish the Sterling Foundation. Its mission was simple: to combine my father's passion for design with my mother's compassionate spirit. We would fund and design beautiful, functional public spaces for communities that needed them, most libraries in low-income neighborhoods, parks for at-risk children, community centers for the elderly. We would build things that lasted, things that brought people together, things that mattered. I closed my small design business and became the foundation's full-time director. I finally used my father's desk, not as a relic of the past, but as a tool for the future, sketching out ideas for playgrounds and reading nooks. The work was harder than anything I'd ever done, but it was filled with a purpose I had never known. The house I grew up in was eventually sold as part of the asset seizure, its contents auctioned off. I didn't go. I didn't need anything from it. I had the memories that mattered, and I was busy building something new. At the beginning of this whole nightmare, I told you I felt like I was living in a house someone else had built. And for a long time, that was true. I was living within the blueprints my father had laid out, a life defined by his presence, his loss, and finally his secrets. But the greatest gift he ever gave me wasn't the $7 million. It was the final puzzle he left behind. It was a test that forced me to stop being a resident in my own life and become the architect. Now I have my own blueprints. They're not as grand as his, they won't shape a city's skyline, but they are mine. And every day I get to build a little piece of a world that I know both my parents would have been proud of. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever felt like you needed to fight for your own truth, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming the odds. And share this with someone who might need a reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can ever build is yourself.